Hello, my name is Fred Drogula. I'm a professor of classics and the humanities here at Ohio University, and I'm the director of the Ping Institute for the Teaching of the Humanities, which is producing this series of short videos to stay engaged in discussions about the importance of the humanities with our colleagues, and in this series to look at how plagues and pandemics have been experienced by humanity in other periods. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the Great Plague that struck ancient Athens in 430 BC, just when Athens had started its Peloponnesian War, a huge 27-year war with Sparta, the famous Sparta. Now, this war made Athens particularly vulnerable to the plague because Spartan invasions into Athenian territory had forced the majority of Athenians who lived on farms in the countryside to flock into the walls of the city for protection. Now, the city had not been designed for this sudden increase in population density, and the Athenians had to pile in wherever there was room, because the invasions could take weeks or months at a time. So Athenians would cram into the city, squeezing into places, camping in temples and the streets and the marketplaces. Everything became extremely crowded, extremely dirty, very unhygienic, right? This is a perfect condition for a plague to spread in a city with very, very high population density and low hygiene. The plague first appeared in Athens's port town of Piraeus on ships that were said to have come from Egypt, leading historians to look for the origins of the disease in Africa. Now, modern historians and scientists have tried to figure out what this was. There have been a lot of suggestions over the years: typhus, smallpox, measles, even Ebola. Currently, the leading theory is that it was some type of hemorrhagic fever, although there's still no full agreement on exactly what the disease was. What is clear is that it moved quickly and it was very deadly. It so happened that the Athenian historian and politician Thucydides was living and writing in Athens at this time. He wrote this history on the Peloponnesian War. And when the plague broke out, he took the time to describe in great detail the movements of the disease, the symptoms, and the treatments that the Athenians tried, because he was keenly aware that future generations would read his work. And so he wanted to provide for them as much information as possible about the nature of the disease. Now, he emphasizes its astonishing power. It struck down healthy people, sick people, old, young, strong, weak, indiscriminately, and it did so with incredible speed. Most of those who contracted the disease died in great misery after only a few days, although he did note that a few survived, and those seemed to obtain immunity to the disease, and they were able to offer some comfort to the dying because of their immunity. The death rate was staggering, killing perhaps 25% of the entire population of Athens. Now, while Thucydides took careful notes about the disease's symptoms and its lethal nature, he was particularly interested in the psychological impact that the plague had on his fellow citizens. At this time, the Athenians prided themselves on being the most disciplined, the most civilized, the most sophisticated, the most educated of all the Greeks. But Thucydides noted that their strength and their resilience quickly crumbled under the strain of the plague, and that they became lawless. And there's a large section in his work where he really explores the psychological impact in this way. He writes how bodies were left to rot in the streets and in holy temples, while others were hurled indiscriminately onto funeral pyres belonging to other people, which is essentially stealing somebody's funeral rites, stealing their funeral pyre, which is a great sin in Greek religious thought. He also noted, though, that in addition to this immorality, this lawlessness, some Athenians had an entirely different reaction, embracing a type of hedonism, throwing all care to the wind, ignoring the laws of gods and man, and just living for partying. He writes in a famous passage in Book 2 of his account, Book 2, paragraph 53. He writes, "The great lawlessness that grew everywhere in the city began with this disease. For, as the rich suddenly died, and men previously worth nothing took over their estates, people saw before their eyes such quick reversals that they dared to do freely things they would have hidden before, things they never would have admitted to, they did for pleasure. And so, because they thought their lives and their property were equally ephemeral, they justified seeking quick satisfaction and easy pleasures. As for doing what had been considered noble, no one was eager to take any further pains for this because they thought it uncertain whether or not they should achieve it. But the pleasure of the moment and whatever contributed to that were set up as standards of nobility and usefulness. No one was held back in awe, either by fear of the gods or by the laws of men. Not by the gods, because men concluded it was all the same whether they worshipped them or not, seeing that all perished alike. And not by the laws, because no one expected to live until he was tried and punished for his crimes. But they thought that a far greater sentence hung over their heads now, and that before this fell, they had a reason to get some pleasure from life. So, this particular type of almost hedonistic live for the moment, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we will all be dead kind of attitude. Thucydides really noted how quickly the disciplined, warlike Athenians resorted to this under the strain of the disease. After killing perhaps a quarter of the population, the plague went away from Athens, but it would pop up for many years throughout the Athenian Empire. Athens had a great naval empire, so the disease traveled with its soldiers on ships, and the disease popped up, had outbreaks here and again for several years. But Athens survived to keep fighting. Eventually, the plague went away, and the war carried on for 27 years. Athens was mortally wounded by the plague, the massive loss of manpower and resources so early, and the gut check to the national psyche that this plague delivered was very difficult and would be a problem for them throughout the war. But Thucydides' work has survived for 24 centuries to show us the different reactions that people had to the terrible challenges posed by that disease, by that pandemic, how some people reacted to it one way and some others. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this very brief overview of the Great Plague of Athens, and I hope you take a look at more of the Ping Institute's videos. Thanks very much.